all we're going to do is we'll just talk about the stuff we spoke about the other day, like the school stuff, etc.
No, absolutely.
You know,
You fire away, so to speak, or intro, or whatever it is we do, and I'll follow you.
well, listen, I'll tell you what. For people that don't know you, give
Yeah.
us a potted history of your background.
Yeah, sure. A little bit about me. Forgive me, I'll just kind of fairly succinctly give you some of my background in that. I'm Manchester born and bred, good old Manchester, as they say. My parents are from Jamaica. I left school at 14, which a lot of people find interesting. No, I wasn't kicked out of school. My birthday's in August, and in my youth, when you were August born, you were always the youngest in the class.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
August born as well.
Oh, right. So you know the parallels then, isn't it? So you possibly not so much 14. But anyway, left school at 14, went straight into the army, as you do, as one does, and spent 20 odd years in the army, doing what army people do and playing loads of sport and traveling around the world, really. I was quite fortunate in that respect. We'll get on to our ages later, but i.e., when I was in the service like yourself, there weren't so many wars and conflicts as there are today.
That's right, yeah.
So hence, probably like yourself and many others, I was fairly okay at sports. I spent a lot of time in tracksuit, traveling around the world playing sports for the Army and the Royal Army Medical Corps. I think the Medical Corps. That's what I represent, by the way.
Oh, right.
Say again, mate?
You in the medical corps?
Yeah, I was Royal Medical Corps, mate. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I wanted to be a Royal Engineer, but when I went to join up and go in there, unfortunately, the intakes of boys' service is a bit like boarding school, to use the analogy.
All right, yeah.
Do your terms, etc. When I went to sign up, basically the engineers were full at that time. September 70 intake. There you go. A lot of people start doing some maths now. But when I went to join, they're all working it out between you and I. Hang on, these two guys look very young for their ages. But we'll let them. We'll talk about exfoliating on another clip maybe. But when I went to join up, sorry, my apologies, going into it, there was either the Royal Engineers or the the Royal Artillery or the Royal Army Medical Corps. And I knew very little about the Army, other than the fact that the artillery sounded a bit too serious, and the medics, I thought, well, what the hell, give the medics a go. So hence, 20 odd years in the Royal Army Medical Corps in Adius Fidelis. That's the core. Yeah, steadfast in adversity. That's the core motto. But moving forward, I left the army, moved to Maidstone in Kent, where I worked as a medical practice manager in a doctor's surgery for 15 months.
Yeah.
I often say this when I'm doing training. Interestingly, I came across more violence and aggression 15 months in a doctor's surgery than I did 20 odd years in the army.
Yeah.
Okay, default, that's tongue in cheek. But the point I'm coming to, though, is that the last thing I expected in the surgery was some of the topics we were going to speak about.
Mm.
Yeah, I can remember it fairly clearly. The first time it happened in the waiting room, it kind of felt surreal. The things we support people around, it literally did feel surreal. It took me a second or two to get my head into, we need to do something about this to try and stop it before it goes crazy and get out of hand.
Yeah.
Left the surgery, not because of the violence and aggression, but to go into training. In 94, May 94, I was fortunate enough to get a job at Kent Police. It was advertised as a PTI, physical training instructor. To be honest, from day one, it was just straight into what was known then as police self-defense. We spoke about it, the Aikido Judo basis.
Yeah.
Arrest in defense. Yeah, sorry, taking us back now. You're getting me reflecting about stuff here, trying to remember all this. But from day one, as I say, it was purely about police self-defense, which we now know as police personal safety training. It's evolved over the 20 odd years. And importantly, whilst I was doing that role, I also then started to work in the communities. I'm going to call it community engagement.
Yeah.
Starting, I'm going to say the local community group, just giving them some tips and advice where, things evolved into getting the time off from a policing perspective to go and give these talks was becoming difficult. So then I started to get authorities you had to do in those days, to get permission to do work outside of policing. I'm smiling now, because we look back to those days and we'll expand on this exactly. After the youngsters will probably look at us and think, what, you had to get permission to do this? Excuse me, but we did. And as I say, because getting time off, particularly during the day, was becoming more and more difficult, then I got permission authority, as we called it, to be able to do the training outside. Since then, I'm now a part of the board of the Institute of Conflict Management, which takes it wider. There's a lot around health and social care, education, as we'll speak about a little bit later on. But importantly, if we think about all sectors, whether it be private, public, or I'm going to say community group sectors, where people support people around customer service.
Mm.
Whilst, if I can use a generic analogy, 80% of the time there or thereabouts, that service provision goes well. As you and I know, and many others know, there's about 20% of the time across all sectors when things start to go wrong or have already gone wrong.
Yeah.
You know? And like you and many of our colleagues up and down the country throughout the world, without using too many cliches, what we're trying to do, isn't it, is empower people to do the right thing, i.e. prevent it happening in the first instance. If they fail to do that, then the confidence to de-escalate. And then, as we know, in some known high-risk areas, and I use the point known high-risk areas as we'll come to talk about, then having to manage challenging, disruptive, aggressive, violent behaviour.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries. And we'll talk about what we mean by that, really.
Yeah.
Just a final point about my introduction. Along with yourself and many other colleagues, well-respected colleagues you and I know, do the expert witness reporting, which sometimes then cross-references with oral evidence in courts or at tribunals or at inquests, i.e. hearing proceeding, where, as you know, from solicitor groups, we receive case files and we're asked to give our opinion based on the case file evidence of whether the, I'm going to say, use of force actions, to use a generic reference, was appropriate, proportionate, or necessary based on the circumstances of the evidence as presented. You know, that there, if I can say, is a fairly succinct synopsis about myself, just linking into this chat we're going to have.
Yeah, it's very, very similar to mine. But what's interesting is when we get to court and we're writing these reports for court and you're seeing the information come in.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the advice, and this is what I wanted to do this with you, some of the things that people get told on training courses by trainers, you know, or even their managers sometimes, about what they can and can't do, it's absolutely mad.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I mean, the classic is your single person restraint. You know, that's a classic one. And the other one, which for me is one that I you know, time and time again I get it, and I know we've talked about this, is no restraint policies.
Oh gosh, yeah, please. Well, for me, there's two great areas to start, which in fairness, we could spend all day, but let's start with no restraint then. I mean, lead on with some of the examples of things you've just had, and then we can take it where it needs to go, please.
Well, I mean, you know, I had a case in court, and I know you've had many, where, you know, a teacher was basically disciplined by the school, you know, and was put under investigation because the school had a no restraint policy, but the teacher felt the need to restrain to stop the child from harming itself, you know.
Mm.
And they said, oh, we have a no restraint policy. He did the right thing. You know, the police weren't interested. The police said, no, the guy should be given a commendation, you know, but the school said, yeah, but we have this policy, so whack, you're off, you know, we're going to investigate you. And they actually suspended him. And I got involved with that. And you know, the first question I asked them, I said, so, you know, you have a no restraint policy? They said, yeah, we have this no restraint policy. I said, right. So there's no risk of staff ever needing to restrain. The head teacher said, no, there's none whatsoever. I said, that's great. I said, because you obviously, if you understand health and safety, you'll know that there's no need to have a policy for something that you don't need to do. And he just looked at me and went, what do you mean? I said, well, the reality is, I said, is you just don't want staff to train, and you just don't want to actually pay for the bloody training. And yeah, I mean, like you, we got the case thrown out of court. Give me 1 second, mate. I just got to put this switch on. Hang on. Yeah.
No problems. No worries. No problems.
So I didn't want to run out of juice in my laptop. Then I plugged it in. But what's your take on no restraint policies?
Yeah, not a problem. Similar to you, I mean, again, I was invited to deliver some training. You know, I'm going to call it. The heading was challenging behaviour and breakaway training. Yeah. So following, I'm going to say, the discussions around TNA training needs analysis. You know, I then obviously rolled up to deliver the training and made some reasonable assumptions, which I'm hoping to verify in the training, about the fact that they're obviously coming across challenging behaviour, which is documented in some way, shape or form. Mm. Anyway, we start doing the training, you know, we do the usual things, I would call it the introductions, get a bit of context about people's experiences, because as you know yourself, sometimes what you're asked to deliver and people's experiences are a little bit apart sometimes. You know, so importantly, we can contextualise the training to the people who attend. Well, anyway, we're delivering the training, and yeah, it's definitely gone past 10 o'clock anyway, probably going towards coffee break. We're talking about things, and we're talking about use of reasonable force, and we're getting into the areas of common law, duty of care, when somebody pipes up to me, excuse me a second, yeah, well, we have a no hands-on policy. I said, okay, just explain to me what you mean by no hands-on policy. Yeah, we're not allowed to touch people. And I must be honest, it's one of those moments where you think, Okay, I'm going to remain calm here. Not that I'm being unprofessional, but I'm kind of raging inside. I really am, and I must be honest, looking back, probably could have done it better, but because of the emotion and getting excited about wanting to do the right thing, of course, I did the old, probably wasn't the best approach, but anyway, I walked over to the whiteboard and I said to them, can somebody explain to me what the title of this course is? Yeah. And you can imagine some of their reactions. What do you mean? What's the title of this course? Well, Challenging Behavior and Breakaway Training. So I wrote it up on the board, Challenging Behavior, Breakaway Training. So, okay, what's your thoughts about breakaway training then? Got a few comments. I said, right, let's go back to then. Somebody's just said to me, you've got a no hands-on, no restraint policy, etc. I go, yes, that's right. So I said, so why are we doing this training? Yeah. And somebody said, what do you mean, why are we doing this training? Well, I said, if we've got a no hands-on policy, why are we doing breakaway training? Then it doesn't make sense. And of course, you can imagine there was a tumbleweed of silence in the classroom at that point, which I then went on to reiterate, can I suggest to you that you put it to your senior leadership team, and if you want, invite them down here, and I would say exactly what I'm going to say now. I will go as far as to say, A, your policy is wrong, B, potentially it could be illegal, and of course that started some murmuring. And I said, look, this is probably a good time to adjourn. Go and speak to your SLT. As I say, I'm happy for them to come and speak to me, or I'll go and see them and reiterate, based on our conversation, what I've just said to you. So, no restraint policy, Mark. Sorry, it goes against everybody's basic human right, doesn't it, around liberty?
Well, it's the usual thing, it's a health and safety issue. If staff are expected to do it, then the Health and Safety Work Act kicks in, so it becomes a legal requirement. Obviously if they do a risk assessment and they say, right, there's no need to ever restrain anyone, so you might have, an environment where you've never got to touch anyone, then you don't need training because the risk assessment dictates that.
Absolutely.
But going back to your point, why would they put on a training course if they don't need it?
Well, hence, sorry to cut across, but hence my comment about raging inside to think, why am I here? To deliver breakaway training. For me, I should say we did address it and we did carry on doing the breakaway training. I made the recommendation and put it in writing. You perhaps need to review the content of your policy, as you can imagine.
Another one I get, and I know we spoke about this before, is where organisations say to their staff, well, you don't need any training because you can use force to restrain someone or defend yourself under common law. And they go, right. And then they're going to discipline their staff if they don't like what they do, but they haven't provided them with any training. Now, I was talking to Eric about this, and I think Eric, for those that are listening, Eric Baskin is a lawyer at Liverpool John Moores, and we had this discussion. And I don't think people actually realise that common law actually sits under statute.
Yes, indeed.
So if the Health and Safety Work Act sits above it, so if an employer says, well, hang on, just use your common law rights if you have to do it, they're by default saying, we got a problem and you need to use force to defend yourself or restrain someone. They're also admitting, if they say, we're not going to train you, but you can use your common law rights, that they're breaching the Health and Safety Work Act. It's crazy that they get away with it.
No, absolutely. And I think it comes back to the point you said as well. And, we're going to be using a lot of referencing, but, 20 odd years plus down the line, as we'll also expand on, involved in, prevention management of, I'm going to say, challenging, aggressive and violent behaviour. We still have to take people right back, and you've already made reference to it, the Health and Safety at Work Act and foreseeable risk.
Yeah.
Foreseeable risk, which leads us into two key areas, isn't it? I.e., either a service user, a patient, a customer, a person has demonstrated, displayed some form of challenging behaviour which has been recorded. Post the recording of that incident, then we have some kind of, of course, let's look after the welfare of the people who are involved, of course, not forgetting that, of course, which is significantly important. But having considered and looked at the welfare of the individuals involved, all parties, then we need to look at, don't we, i.e. some behaviour analysis which led up to, I'm going to call it challenging behaviours to use the generic, but equally importantly, what measures can we organisationally put in place to kind of reduce, isolate that risk? But that gives us our known risk factors, doesn't it? And again, and I am going to keep making the point, and won't make any apologies to being a broken record. Health and Safety at Work Act, foreseeable risk. Foreseeable risk.
Well, see this thing about being a broken record. I heard a brilliant, a brilliant story, and it was a story about a preacher, and the preacher got, came into this church. He was a new preacher in the church, And he gave his first sermon, and all the people there thought it was brilliant. And they came back the second week, and he gave the same sermon. So they thought, well, we'll give him a bit of slack. It's the second week. They came back the third week, third Sunday. He gave the same sermon, and he gave the same sermon for 6 weeks. Right. So at the end of it, the elders of the church got together with him, and they said, "Look, we'd like a word with you." And he said, "Well, yeah. Well, what is it?" They said, "You preached the same sermon for the last 6 weeks." And he went, "Yeah." He said, "I'm going to keep on preaching it until you get it." You know. And so the whole point about being a broken record is it's relevant that people go back to the basics. And there's no point in moving forward. And I hear all this stuff, oh, we're doing advanced stuff. Oh, all right then.
Yes.
For me, advanced stuff is only the basics done better. I don't know what you're doing, is it?
Oh, mate, please. I think we're on the same page. The language might be a little bit different, but let's keep it straightforward, isn't it? See, the basic, and I just use a generic reference, advanced, but it must transition from the basic. But there must be a need for it. Yeah, because we can do all this fancy advanced stuff, but let's get the basics right. And even coming back a pace, and a conversation I often have with people is, who's responsible for our safety in the workplace? And actually, to my surprise, I get a lot of silence from a lot of people, which does concern me slightly in context. But then I'll get invariably, well, we the staff. And I'll go, okay, fair enough. But who's ultimately responsible for our safety? You know where I'm going with this, of course.
Yeah.
Well, management are, yeah, of course, great. So, how do management know about the risks? Yeah, lots of answers. No, keep going. Risk assessments, right, I like that. Risk assessment, great. But who or what informs the risk assessments? And then, well, we do. How do we do that? Well, from the incidents we report, all right, brilliant. Now we're starting to get somewhere. So, let's come back a pace. So if we don't report it, guess what? If it wasn't written down, it didn't happen. So management can look us straight in the eye and go, Trevel, Mark, what risk?
Yeah.
But again, we come right back to our duty of care, isn't it, as the staff, is to manage upwards. Management's duty of care, as we know, is to review the information that's reported up, disseminate the outcome of that review, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's where the 180, 360, call it what you want, comes into play.
Well, it's actually
on the front. Go back a pace.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a health and safety model that you and I know that we use regularly, which is the HSG 65 model, which dictates how the information flows and proactive and reactive reporting and that sort of stuff. And, when I'm doing consultancy work, as I know you do with companies, we use that model as a framework to make sure that the information is coming in and we feed into it from training and staff feed into it. But then, it leads on to the other point I want to discuss with you is when these organizations or some organizations implement training, they very much still, and this, I'm going back now nearly 30 years when I started doing this, they're relying on the training provider dictating what they need.
Yes.
And it's some of the mad stuff, we hear, I mean, I was working with a school some time ago, and I don't do a lot of stuff at school, but I know you do. And they said to me, oh, you're going to talk about common law. And I went, yeah, I'll talk about common law if you like. What do you want to know? They said, well, is it true that only teachers have the right to use force under common law and teaching assistants don't? And I went, where did that come from? And they said, well, that's what we were told in the training course. The training provider told us. So I got in touch with the training company and I said, look, this bit of advice you've given them, I said, I'm just here doing a bit of consultancy work. They said, yeah. Teachers, teachers have a common law right to the pupils, but teaching assistants don't, so they can't use force under common law. And, jokingly aside, that's dangerous.
Well, particularly from a training provider, and before I get into that, just to kind of expand on what you've been talking about there, let's go back a pace, isn't it? But for schools and all clients to do their due diligence about the people who are coming in to provide the training.
Yeah.
That's a factor. And again, so many topics there, isn't it? With respect, we could spend a lot of time discussing.
I mean, we got to doing this because we were having a conversation on the phone the other day about a parent that got in touch with me. Do you remember?
Yes, indeed. I remember it well.
And she got in touch because her son came home and he's about to be done. They're going through a diagnostic process with him at the moment because they think he's got ADHD or autism. He's on the spectrum. They just got to formalise the diagnosis. But he's certainly got behavioural problems at school. And the school's done really well with him, in terms of progressing his education. But the son came home and he said to his mother, "Oh, I was restrained today," and she was quite concerned about that. But it was the way in which he was restrained. It was the hands on the back of the neck and pushing the head forward and taking him down to the ground and holding him on the floor. And she took him to the hospital, and they said, yeah, he's got soft tissue damage around the back of his neck. So she just did a Google search and she found me.
Mm-hmm.
Found a couple of other people as well, and she asked my advice, because initially her and her partner, her husband, were literally fuming. They were going to go into the school all guns blazing. I said, no, don't do that. Let's get the, like you would do, because you write reports like I do. Let's get the evidence first. Let's get the facts. Let's get the information. So I asked her to ask for a certain number of documents, which she did. And then we sat back. And when she went for the meeting, the head teacher of the school was absolutely devastated by the fact that this had happened. But the teacher who was involved with the restraint had gone off sick as well, because she was absolutely broken by it, that they'd done it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it came back to another, this point about wrong advice. And apparently the trainer, and I've got to say apparently, because they can't remember whether they were shown it or whether they were told it, because apparently the refreshers with this company is every 3 years. And as you know, skill retention was going to erode massively, over 3 years. Yeah. He either told them or he demonstrated to them that you put your hands on the back of the neck and push the child's head forward. So long story short, got the stuff and it's all being sorted out now, and it's going to come to a good conclusion. But this is the danger where, I got the medical report for this, got the training manuals, and there's nothing in there that said that they could use this technique. Right. So you get trainers making stuff up outside of the program to fill a gap that the program's not filling. Excuse me, a bit dry one. So you've certainly got a skills shortage or a gap in that. But if you were doing what you were describing earlier on, where you're working with the organisation over a period of years, and this training provider's been with the school for a number of years, you would get proactive and reactive feedback.
Absolutely.
And change the system. So I know, like you do, we've started off with version 1, and we've ended up over X years with version 10, 11, 12, 13 and onwards, because things need to evolve. But do you get that a lot with schools contacting you?
Yeah, I do actually. I get quite a lot of schools, around the issue of, well, yes, we've had to restrain a child on the floor, or we keep having to, and almost alluding to, and I do Q&A them about this, the default, because the child, let's say, has a lot of repetition of a particular form of behaviour, that we were defaulting taking that child, him, her, to the ground. And like yourself, the first and most obvious question is, what was the need to take the child to the ground in the first instance? Well, because we were struggling to control him or her whilst they were standing. Okay, fair enough, I respect that, but we need more than that in the discussion. Was it imperative that you had to take the child to the ground? What were the kind of, I'm going to call them situational factors that necessitated you in that instance taking the child to the ground? And let's be honest, I appreciate, in many instances, I respect your view, your opinion. I wasn't there, but we have to ask the question, was it necessary for you to keep hands on that particular child at that particular moment in time? Were there not any options around containment, for example? Go on, sorry.
And also, if they're doing that regularly, they can't get away with saying it's an emergency situation or it's an exceptional situation, because once they've done it once, the next one becomes planned. So it's got to go back to your risk assessment.
Absolutely, and and again, for me, there's so many areas we can get into it, but we'll come back to exactly that point, isn't it? I.e., whether it's one or whether it's repeat behaviour. And by the way, my definition from an introductory point of repeat behaviour is 2 or more. If you follow my analogy, 2 or more. Well, if it's frequency of occurrence, then let's take a pace back and just expanding on what you said there. So I'm not repeating what you said. What are we putting in place to eliminate the risk? And if we think about hierarchy of risk control, we're back to risk assessments again, health and safety, foreseeable risk. But, eliminating the risk is an aspiration, which we should all subscribe to. I use the term deliberately, an aspiration. It is not reality, i.e., if Trevel Henry and or Mark Dawes displayed challenging behaviour before, they may potentially do it again. Whilst it remains the aspiration, and that's the level we should be working to, the reality, and I say the reality is, what are we putting in place to reduce, isolate, and control that risk before it reoccurs? And let me just make the reference to, excuse me, I must be catching your coffee here. Let me make the reference to, sorry, take me off track now. You always do this. The reference to triggers and behaviours, sorry, my apologies, back on track now. The reference to triggers and behaviours, isn't it? and I'm not just trying to kind of throw things out there, sorry, but fact is a lot of people relate to this directly or indirectly. But triggers and behaviors, aren't we? The physiological, psychological reaction to the anticipation of danger,
Mm.
the nervous feeling inside of us, isn't it? Because we feel it often before we think it, if you follow.
Yeah.
Now, I know we could debate that all day long, but it is a feeling first, isn't it? Then a psychological thought about, yeah, I feel nervous in my guts. Yeah. But let's come back to that though. Yeah. If we start to get those feelings from those triggers that are being displayed, that's the point, isn't it? We need to be putting the de-escalation in place.
Yeah.
Even if it's as basic as, depending on the circumstances, thinking about your own body language. Not that we're being aggressive, so that's the door, apologies.
Right.
No, I think my good lady's coming down to pick up the door, Alfie's coming down, I think. But not that we're being assertive in our body language, but we sometimes, aren't we? We're very conscious of the fact that, as an adult and a young child, and the fact that our stature's taller than them, we're conscious sometimes, isn't it? Even though we're being quite open, we just want to reinforce that open, don't we, that open body language.
Mm.
And for me, and sincerely, if we're consciously aware of our own body language and want to make sure it's more open and receptive in context, then surely we're at the point of, I'm going to call it an incident report or a near miss report, if you follow where I'm going.
Yeah.
Got to be, if you're consciously thinking about it, you've got to be at that stage of we're managing challenging behavior. Well, let's go right back to, sorry, a moment, and just, so, we've had to, let's say, positively handle the child, yeah? But I still stand by, and going back to your point, any training program involving physical intervention as a whole must incorporate stroke include positional stroke restraint asphyxiation awareness. So again, we come back to this provider who's talking about, as we believe, routinely taking people down to the ground. Well, for me, I'll just close on this particular point. It's wrong, wrong, wrong.
Mm.
Sorry, I can't put it any clearer than
No,
that.
you're absolutely right. I mean, Pete Boatman, God bless him, he's no longer with us.
So
We were talking about this in the early 90s.
Yes,
I remember Pete's first program that I went on. It was all about, restraint reduction, positional asphyxiation, and everything else. But yeah, no, you raised some interesting points. But see, for this to work, there's got to be a no blame culture. And
Okay.
staff are so scared of being blamed that it then reverts into not reporting. It reverts into all that nervousness. Now, from my background, like you, I was in the forces, but I got commissioned and I became a pilot. Not a lot of people. Quite right too. You should be standing up, actually, Trevel. But I ended up going through the pilot training, and I got a bit. I hold my hands up. I failed it. I was useless. Because I'd been 10 years in the ranks, and I was more interested in getting down the pub on a Friday night instead of flying an aircraft around at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I got chopped. But the good thing about aircrew training was we were told right from the start, look, if you make a mistake, we need to know, because if we're open and transparent about it, it's going to prevent maybe a major incident later on. So our debriefs were absolutely brilliant, and that's the one thing I really liked about it. But when I go into organisations now, schools and care homes and hospitals, and you say, well, what's the debrief? Say, well, we fill out the incident report book, and that's about it. But the aspect of addressing the triggers and everything else isn't there. But also, staff live in some areas, live in a culture where they feel that if they report something, they could be blamed for doing it.
Yes.
So it drives the problem underground. So that's another sort of area that people need to look at as a whole. If organisations structure the right debriefs, and they, staff are more forthcoming with it, we have more information, we put it back into the system and help reduce restraint overall, and I know you share the same thoughts.
Well, I mean, obviously we hope people take a lot away from this, but one area I'd like everybody to consistently take away is this bit about, as you say, transparency. It's 2020. I'm not saying it's perfect, but we go back to yours and my younger days, when I'd go and see the sergeant and say, I've got a problem, and he'd go away and sort yourself out, Well, let's be honest. That's tantamount to bullying, isn't it? Because the next time I have that same similar, if I have the same similar issue, I'm not going to go back to the sergeant stroke my supervisor to tell them, because I know the response I'm going to get. Which means then I'm either going to avoid that situation that's developing, or I'm going to manage it badly. But what I'm trying to get to, and like you, I know we spoke lots about this, and I'm like you, we're both passionate about this. Transparency. All we want to do is empower people to speak up and do the right thing, i.e., talk to your colleague or your supervisor or manager and say, this person is causing me to feel this way. It's not that we can't manage the situation, we just want to be more empowered. If somebody else knows about it, we feel more empowered to do the right thing, whatever that means at the time.
They can't do, they can't do that in house. They can whistleblow, and whistleblowers now are protected by law. So if they have to go to that extent, which is a shame if they have to, but it's there. It's the protection's there. But listen, I want to read you some of the comments. Did you look at the Facebook page, by the way, with all the comments?
Yeah, look at the Facebook page. Can I just before we do that, can I just mention a colleague called I don't think you've met him, Nick Inge.
Nick Inge.
He runs a company called I Trust Assurance, who does a lot on whistleblowing.
All right.
He's actually put a book out there as well. And forgive me, because hopefully at some time I'll introduce you to him and get to meet him. But that area about confidence and being empowered, certainly I Trust Assurance is what he does. Nick Inge. Sorry, I just wanted to give him a bit of a mention. Sorry, because
you're on commission.
No, stop it. What are you doing to me?
Well, let me bring this up. I'm going to try and share this screen now. So this may work, it may not. Let me just see if it comes out. Can you see that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, bloody hell. I've got is this a younger looking you? This wasn't taken this week, was it?
Is it what?
Is this a younger looking you?
No, it's just a gift, Trevor. Just a gift.
Yeah, well, go ahead, mate. Yeah, got it.
I put this up and I said, look, I'm doing a video with an old friend of mine on Thursday, who in my opinion is one of the best training experts in the industry, but I couldn't get him, so I had to use you. And as part of that video, we'll be discussing some of the mad things that some people have been told, such as common law applies, etc. And I asked them to put their comments down. Now, there's some great comments here, but I was looking through here. Like, I've got to show you this one. Hang on. One from Heidi here. We mustn't talk to the person whilst we are holding them.
Hey?
Yeah, I mean, Heidi's a brilliant trainer. She does a lot in schools, care homes, and etc.
I apologize. I don't think I've met Heidi. I know the name very well. We possibly communicated, but I don't think I've met her. Heidi, if I have met you, I do apologize sincerely. But excuse the pun, mate, and I've got to say this: I'm speechless at that comment.
Yeah. It's obviously if someone's told Heidi that that's what they've been told on a previous training course. Just
move on, which flies in the point of de-escalation customer service, doesn't it? Relationships.
Yeah.
Sorry, mate.
Now we all know about the basket hold, don't we? The single person restraint. Not only is it a bad technique, but it carries risk. It's also a lone working activity. And Doug's put here, a psychotherapist has done the review of the small child hold, TRAP, stroke tantrum hold, so it's safe for us trainers to keep on using, despite medical professionals stating otherwise.
Something you mentioned on your introduction, single person restraint as a starter for 10.
I was speaking at a conference once, and I mentioned about the basket hold, and I said, well, it shouldn't be used. Enough evidence out there not to use it for various reasons. And this trainer said, well, we've done a risk assessment on it, and therefore it's okay to use. I said, well, what did your risk assessment say? He said, the risk assessment said it was okay to use. I said, well, who did the risk assessment? He said, I did. I said, well, have you done a risk assessment course? He went, no. So all that was the justification of a bias, which is mad. Here's one from Jim here. Jim's a brilliant trainer. He's in Australia at the moment.
Oh, yeah, Jim, yes. Yeah, I met Jim.
Oh, you met Jim, haven't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I've communicated with him a few times, yes.
Prone position is fine, and it is okay to keep a person in prone restraint for 3 minutes, and we ask staff to time the restraint so we know it's 3 minutes max.
Can I come in on this one? Many years ago, I was invited down to an NHS trust to give some feedback on the case review that had come up. And again, the trust policy was they could restrain people on the ground for 10 minutes. Yeah, exactly. It'll last us 3 minutes, but 10 minutes. So anyway, as you do, you make your notes, you have some reflections, think about what you're going to talk about. Went into the meeting, this point came up, and my first question was, okay, so could you advise me then, what is it you're expecting your staff to do at 10 minutes, 1 second if they haven't already let go of that person? Just went silent.
Yeah. Well, this came out, I think it was in the wake of the Rocky Bennett case, wasn't it? They brought the 3 minutes out.
It goes back. Yeah.
But there was no evidence to support the 3 minutes. So no mad. Now, Ricky's put one in. Having restraint PMVA training will solve all the problems around behaviours that challenge. Yeah. I mean, who tells them these stuff? Oh, Nicola's come up with one. If the patient is going to punch you in the face, you are not allowed to defend yourself. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
Well, actually, stay with that point for a moment, though. How many people do we hear say, once they've done something to us, it's okay for us to then respond? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Gareth here, don't want staff to use breakaway techniques and wait on security team.
Whoa.
Oh, no, I've got to tell you a story on this one. This is brilliant. I did some work at a hospital once, and I went in, and they said, we're training the portering team to respond to calls for assistance from A&E. So I said, okay, so in my head then, that means that if there's a bit of violence in A&E, your portering team are going to respond to a call for assistance and they're going to deal with that. They went, yeah. I said, what training have they had? I said, breakaway techniques. So I said, what about restraint? They said, no, we don't want to teach them restraint because if they hurt someone, we can be sued. So we taught them to break away. So I said, so your portering team are going to respond to a call for assistance, and when they get grabbed, they're going to break away. They went, yeah. I said, who's coming? They said, well, we'll call for the police then. Well, absolute madness. Oh, Paul's come up with a great one. I can teach restraint because I have a black belt in Aikido. Now, I've got to be honest with you. I had a conversation with someone the other day on this, who's a phenomenal martial artist, absolutely, really nice guy. He's hugely credible, done a massive amount of training, and wanted to go in and just start teaching restraint. And I said, well, it's a different thing altogether because you don't cover the legislation when you do your black belt, and there's so many different legislations there. Kev Evans,
just before you move on the martial arts one, I'm going to be controversial here, and note people, I'm saying I'm going to be controversial. Martial arts training is a choreographed sport.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's actually governed by Sport England if they have a proper governing body, so it doesn't come under workplace stuff. Kev Evans, best pick I've seen of you yet, mate. Thanks, Kev, but it's nothing to do with the thread, buddy, but I appreciate it. Man, yeah. I'll come at that in a minute, Ricky. One from Nick Hazard here. That staff can just jab someone in the throat if they are showing any sign of aggression. Now
remember the jugular notch going back to the mid-90s?
Probably, yeah.
We don't use it now, but I'm glad you don't remember it because we kind of stopped it not long after it was introduced.
Well, we stopped the strike, certainly. Now, Colin, restraining a child where marks are left is illegal. We have to use techniques that don't leave marks.
Okay, yes. So we're using a holistic physical intervention approach.
Yeah. Now, I've seen some mad martial artists that can actually knock you out without touching you on telly. I mean, maybe it's one of them people. I have no idea. Yeah. Yeah, and Porter, we don't restrain, we just call the police, or if they are self-harming, an ambulance. Yeah. Now that's interesting because if you look at the whole stuff that's come out now in the wake of Sheni Lewis, with the Mental Health Use of Force Act, that was where nursing staff felt, or hospital staff felt they couldn't control the person, so they called for police, and 11 police officers came up, and the guy died as a result of that.
Gosh.
So,
again, that bit about, and we have to respect that police are working to a completely different set of regulations and standards to other workers.
Yeah. And Nicola's got a great one here, and I actually spoke to Nicola about this a while ago on a course. And by the way, Nicola runs, like you, Nicola runs an absolutely brilliant course on de-escalation and everything else, and it's very well structured on it. But she put this on here, staff can use a preemptive strike to change mindset.
Oh no!
Yeah, she was working with an organisation. I won't mention who they are. I actually know who they are. And she rang me up and she said, "Look, Trevel, do you ever get that stuff where someone says something so stupid you actually doubt yourself?"
Yes. Oh mate, yes, absolutely.
Nicola rang me up and she said, "Look, I know this isn't right," she said, but they're so insistent about it. I'm starting to doubt myself. She goes, "They've just told me this. Staff can use a preemptive strike to change mindset." Yeah, that's for cracking up. Yeah.
Well, it's similar to, like you, I've had the conversation, we can't use any kind of restraint holds that cause pain. We're not allowed to do it. Beg your pardon? It's not our intention to cause pain, but, we have to look at the probable, less likely medical implications, etc.
Well, do you know what? I actually, on one of our conferences, Tony Bleekman was speaking, and I asked him to define pain.
Yeah.
And he said the medical professional has been struggling with it because you can't define it because it's a subjective issue. I mean, I don't know what you're like going to the dentist, but I'm a big girl's blouse. I sit there and they bring the needle out and I know it's going to hurt and it hurts like hell. But my wife can sit there and they can jab away all day in her mouth and it doesn't feel it. It's the same needle, same type of skin it's going into, but two different responses based on the subjectivity. So how do you define pain?
Well, can we depart subjectivity and we'll come back to it?
Yeah.
That's another key factor in all of this.
Now, Ricky Holder, care staff are not allowed to use any force in situations as they are untrained and will be sacked and prosecuted if they do.
So, oh gosh. And these are from training providers, yes?
Well, yeah, these guys have got, these people here have gone in and done courses for staff who've been trained by someone else, other trainers, and they're the comments that they're hearing. And, there's loads of them here, that'll come out. Tony Power, we have a no harm policy, but we tell the staff there is common law self-defense, but we don't train them on that. Well, I think we covered that one, but a no harm policy, that's an interesting one. I've come across that before. But it's absolutely crazy, isn't it? You know, some of the stuff that goes on out there, you know, people are being told.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just shaking my head. I'm a little bit lost for words momentarily where to start. You know, but I mean, if I just pick up on the point you made about the old subjectivity of it all, etc. You know, and I think again, isn't it? It's that factor of, and particularly for us people as trainers going in, you know, whilst we have a set of regulation and standards, and quite right, we need standards to work to, but the use of force is, you know, for me, I want to say it, it's 100% subjective. It's 100% subjective, isn't it? You and I, you know, let's say we share many similar experiences and knowledge, etc. But by default, you know, you and I will have a different start point of our reaction to managing a challenging behaviour situation. You know, and to use the analogy, you and I will either A, go forward, B, contain, 3, withdraw and get some backup and support. You know, but again, I ask the question to people often, you know, who's responsible for our actions if we use force? And of course, everybody goes, well, we are. And I go, okay, that's great. Here's my next question. Yeah, who justifies your actions? And everybody goes, we do. And I go, well, you might want to reflect on, think about that for a little bit, for a moment. You know, it's not us, is it? Depending on the level of complaint or challenge that comes in, it's the senior management team, as we know, the regulating authority, or a criminal court. You know, let's not forget criminal court stroke civil court. You know, but you know, if I start with criminal court for ease of reference, you know, and again, it's a key element of the so many key elements in training. Our subjective views, don't they, need to be heard and understood objectively by the people sitting in judgment of us and/or the people sitting in support of us. Because if they can't see it from our point of view, i.e., they don't feel, based on what we're telling them and the evidence presented, they don't feel what we did was appropriate, they don't feel what we did was proportionate, they don't feel what we did was necessary, i.e. reasonable and necessary under common law duty of care, then objectively, they're not seeing it from our point of view, are they?
No. You know? And, you know, we're just echoing what the court test is. You know, if you go to court for reasonableness, you know, whether you use reasonable force, then the first one is subjective. What do you believe you did? And then there's the objective test where the bench or the jury are going to look at it from a detached perspective and go, well, would you know, a normal person in similar circumstances would do the same thing? That's where they're coming from. So, yeah, it's spot on what you're saying. But you know, this is why, you know, and I'll do a bit of a pitch for you actually here, because I don't want to do it. You know, I'm slowing down, as people know now.
So you've just dropped out momentarily.
I've just dropped out. Are you back?
Oh.
I'm here. You've gone still.
Hello, I think you're back.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
I'm back now.
Said, yeah, you just said something about, I'll just say, you were saying about a bit of a pitch and dropped out. What a time to drop out.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I'll do the pitch now. But no, I mean, you know, because I'm slowing down and doing less now because I just want to. But one of the things that is a pitch for you is with all your expert witness knowledge, you know, when a case gets to court, you know, the expense on the person trying to defend themselves is huge. The defense, the cost of the organisation taking a prosecution to court is massive. One of the things I'd like them to consider if they're watching this video is that, you know, you and I have been engaged as expert witnesses on God knows how many cases over the years, and it always ends up in a court somewhere. Either, you know, they can stop that before it gets to court.
Absolutely.
And, you know, what they should be doing is, with a bit of foresight, is coming to someone like you know, who is a credible expert witness with a huge amount of knowledge on the use of force, and saying, look, we think that what happened here is wrong. We think this staff member did something wrong. Could you give us an impartial report on that, you know, prima facie report, an expert witness report on the situation from your detached perspective? And if they did that, they've got a subjective view of what the staff member did. They've got your objective view as an expert witness, which you would submit to a court anyway.
Indeed.
And then with a bit of feedback and consultancy, all that can be fed back into the management system. And if people were a bit more proactive in that sort of thinking, the cost of them getting that report written is nowhere near what they're going to pay in a court of law.
No, and yeah, thank you for that. And I think, you know, and you made reference to it as well, you know, as part of the introduction around this, you know, and again, you know, and others, but I can certainly provide the information about the various regulations, etc., that should be in place and the procedures that should be in place. Because again, and again, one of the key factors you mentioned before was the fact that the child went home and informed the parents that they'd been restrained. Well, I have to confess, I'm flabbergasted that the school did not contact the parents to inform them of what had occurred, or giving them an insight so that they could have a formal sit down.
Yeah. I mean,
You
it
know,
just makes for good transparency, doesn't it, more than anything else?
Absolutely, but certainly, as you say, from the, and yourself, we mentioned Eric, but it's certainly from the to give an objective review and help them and assist them regarding some of the information that should be in place, so that and if we can look at it from the point of view, all things being equal, they can go and have an informed discussion around possible mediation with the school. Let's start from that point. In fairness, isn't it, the parent just wants to know, what happened regarding leading up to the events of my child being restrained. And in fairness, a school in many instances, let's keep the risk in perspective. There's many times when they've done it and it's been appropriate, proportionate, necessary. But again, the school just want to inform the parents in a timely fashion, don't they? Again, what led up towards them having to, positively handle a child.
There's also another dimension to this, and it's a bit that niggles me, which is why I think a service like this is so important. Is I do know, and I know you do too, and I know people watching this will have known this. Some training providers or some training systems will say, these are the techniques we actually teach you. And they'll basically slam the member staff with saying they were wrong because they either didn't use a technique that was in the manual or they used a version of it, And when I first started years ago, one of the things that bugged me, it still bugs me today, is they get trained in loads of stuff. And let's just think about this. We're talking about schools.
Yeah.
No teacher applied for their job in a school to become a teacher. Yeah. See you later. You off? Deborah just going out. Let's
Hi, Deborah. How are you doing?
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah. Interrupts my thing. Just come in and interrupt my thing. I'm in flow.
You're not as cool. You're not as cool as relaxed as you like to think you are, then.
Hey, I am. It's just a gift. But we're going back to the point.
Yeah.
No teacher goes, right, I want to be a teacher. Can't wait to do the restraint training. That's why I want a job as a teacher. They join the profession. Then all of a sudden they get told, oh, by the way, we're going to teach you this stuff. So there's no motivation to do it. So they go through and they learn their whatever system they learn. And there's no motivation there. It's not at the forefront of their mind. They want to the vast majority of teachers, virtually all of them, go into the teaching profession because they want to make a difference to kids. They want to help kids. That's why they do it. Then all of a sudden they're told, well, you've got to now use force on the people you want to help. There has to be a conflict somewhere along the line with that. And they put them through a training program where they probably don't want to engage in having to use it. And then when they go and use it, because they have to, they can't remember the technique as per the textbook. And what the training provider's done, and I've come across numerous cases because I've been involved with them, the training provider goes, well, you've done it wrong because you didn't do the technique as is in the manual, or it's not a technique that we taught. And what they're basically doing is they're not supporting that member of staff who then gets disciplined. And the dangerous part of this is, if it's dealt with internally, you get the disciplinary hearing run by people that don't have expertise like you have. They've had no training on the use of force. Some of them might not even have proper training certificates or educational qualification or anything else. And they come to a decision that member of staff was wrong, and they can dismiss them. And in some cases, they can actually send that teacher's details and put them on a list, a child protection list, and that person is screwed.
Yeah.
Now, where I've been lucky enough to get involved with these things, we've managed to stop that at that stage and go, do you know what? It wasn't in the manual, but it was reasonable in those circumstances. And the reason that member of staff couldn't remember it was, it's too complex. The motor skills that have gone into it are far too complex for them to remember. And they were trained 2 or 3 years ago. Well, your retention of information is degraded massively. But overall, what they did was reasonable circumstances. And if that went to court, that person would be admonished of anything. And we've dealt with it there, at that level to save this escalation. Because the net effect is, the other route is, if that member of staff did get dismissed and they appealed against that, and that appeal goes to court, the school could potentially lose if they didn't do their due diligence. And this is where I think plugging someone like you in, and I know there's other people out there that can do the same thing. Andy Maddox and Joanne Caffrey and Heidi and loads of people can do this sort of stuff. If they could get in at that stage, and even if you charged it, whatever your fee is for charging it, that in comparison to what the cost would be if that went through a tribunal or through a court and then an appeal system, it's a drop in the ocean. And I think it's desperately needed.
Well, again, and can I just kind of refer to an incident where a case review I got involved with where the organisation should remain nameless, but I don't think it'll take too much to try and work it out. A staff member had done a technique which involved, let's say, a kick of the leg. I'm just sweeping kick. Let's just say it as it is. Come on. Okay, but he'd done a sweeping kick. Yeah, and anyway, I got involved, as you say, late in the day when this had come to an internal review hearing, and a significant factor of this case hearing was around the fact that the staff member had used an inappropriate technique, i.e. it wasn't an approved technique, and we'll come back to that point to expand on what you just said a moment ago. So when we looked at it and boiled down, the photo in the book, the manual they were following, showed the demonstration being given with the right leg.
Right.
You know where this is going, but bear with me. I even said the officer, didn't I? There you go, it's out now. I'd used the left leg to deliver the kick in context of managing a situation. And bear with me when I say this was an extreme situation. You just bear with me on that, please. Yeah. But we really got down to the discussion was the officer was using the wrong leg, therefore he was potentially being disciplined.
You're joking.
I am not joking. I am not joking. I live and breathe.
So what about?
Well, come back to the approved bit then, if you don't mind. If I can just pick up this. Like you, one of my, I'm going to call them soapboxes in training, and people who've been with me in training and discussions will know, and I do say this is my soapbox moment. We must go away from using terms like approved techniques. We could have debates about who approves them, etc., for themselves. We must start using terms, for example, like recognized techniques, because the point you quite rightly made, a lot of this goes against the teacher's ethics. They don't want to be putting hands on. With respect, most people who support people don't want to be putting hands on people. Fact, yeah. So a combination of they've done the training, we've used we've used principles and methodologies to apply the learning, yeah. Principles and methodologies, and I will say this because it's an important part. As you say, back in our early days, 20 odd years ago, the training was based around imitation, wasn't it? Everybody followed what the training said. And as we know from some of those comments and some of the examples we've had, there are trainers who still follow that mantra of imitation, do exactly what I tell you to do, no more, no less. Well, that fundamentally takes away people's learning. It has to be methodologies and principles, doesn't it? Methods and principles. Therefore, when a person in context has to apply a technique, then whilst he or she wants to apply what they were taught in training, but because of the young child or the person's behaviors, which we can't predict, they apply the technique slightly different to what they were taught in training, then they need some evidence, don't they, in their incident reporting, yeah, their mitigation for why they try to apply, why they try to apply a recognized technique as they were taught in training. What was the mitigation that wound up them doing something slightly differently? But that fundamentally does not make it wrong. Yeah?
No, you
can't fundamentally make it wrong.
And I can go back, I can always remember a quote, I think it was in a schematic or a thematic inspection by the police going somewhere around 1996 or before. And it was a quote from a chief constable, and he said the purpose of training is to provide the officers with the judgment, knowledge, information and skills so that in a situation of high emotional arousal they can use their discretion. And the more you train them and the more information you give them, the better their judgment and discretion will be when it comes to time to use it. And you can't make things strict. You can't say, they're still doing this stuff, some people. When they hold an arm, well, your thumb has to be behind and not in the front. Okay, right. If it goes behind, we can't support you in court. Really?
Yeah.
And you remember staff thinking, Christ, and they go into a restraint and thinking, where's my thumb supposed to go? And they're not focusing on the person that they're trying to control or de-escalate the situation. It's madness.
Well, I was somewhere recently, and again, the issue about you mentioned earlier, the wrap or the basket hold came up in discussion. And of course, I introduced it underneath high-risk technique. High-risk technique. And the discussion, it's happened a few times in the last 6 months where people have said to me, but we were taught that recently. And I said, well, with respect, I stand by what I say in training. It's a high-risk technique, along with face down on the ground, as we know, the prone restraint, along with seated bent forward in a chair. The high-risk techniques, along with one or two others. So I'm not saying, you can't do it, but what's your mitigation for having to do it?
Well, also, if you're planning and you're risk assessing this, if they say we're going to use this high-risk technique, the first thing that risk assessment methodology says is can that be eliminated?
Absolutely.
It's a single person restraint. How do you eliminate it? You have 2 staff there. Okay. Man, do they have to, you're going to put them in prone? Yeah. Can that be eliminated? Yeah. How? Let's get a safety pod, or let's get a piece of equipment, or let's put them in a chair. Right. Then if you can eliminate it at source, there is no justification for doing it. It's only where you can't do this stuff. And time again, I've been on training courses, said, well, we haven't got a safety pod.
Yeah.
Why one?
Yes.
Pal, I'm promoting your safety pod, by the way, and I'm not on commission for that either.
No, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important. No, it's brilliant, mate. I mean, anything you want to add to this to finish off with? Because I'm bored of you now.
Say again?
I knew I'd get you.
That was one of those Flint responses. What did he just say to me? I can't believe the old ones are always the best. But joking aside, you definitely throw me now. But joking apart, I can't believe you did that on camera as well. Joking apart, please, anything we've said here, myself and Mark, I hope you don't mind me saying, if you professionally disagree with anything we've said, then please come back and professionally challenge us on it. We're open to debate. Yeah? These are our views, our opinions based on our introduction about sort of our qualifications, knowledge and experience in this area. We're not saying we're fundamentally right, and I would love, seriously, sincerely, to have discussions with people. So as I say, if you professionally disagree, come back to us, challenge us, but please give us your opinion as to why you disagree, and then we can have that informed debate.
Yeah. I got one final thing is if you are a parent and you're watching this of a child that's been restrained in school and you don't know what to do, you don't know how to start, get in touch with Trevel or get in touch with me, and I'll put you in touch with Trevel. We can help you there. And in fact, I'll probably set up a web page with some information where you can download this stuff. And I know Nicola Lockery does a lot of stuff with this as well, as does loads of other people who can help us. We have a network of good people, experienced people who can help you. So if you are a parent of a child, been restrained, you don't know where to start, you don't know how to challenge it, you don't know what questions to ask, then come to us, because we've been doing this long enough now. We can advise you on that process and tell you what to ask for and what process to follow. Good stuff. And guys, Trevel, thanks for that, buddy. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to chat to you.
Hey, no problem at all, mate. And we'll catch up soon. But all you guys watching this, thanks ever so much. And we'll speak to you soon, no doubt. All right, Trevel.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
See you later, mate. See you later.
Bye-bye.